consumed by the flood, upheld, protected, gathered up. We will feast in the house of Zion. We will sing with our hearts restored. He has done great things. We will say together, we will feast and weep no more. In the dark of night, before the dawn, my soul be not afraid, for the promised morning, oh how long. O God of Jacob, be my strength. We will feast in the house of Zion. We will sing with our hearts restored. He has done great things. We will say together, we will feast and weep no more. Every vow we've broken and betrayed, you are the faithful one, and from the garden to the grave, bind us together, reach alone. We will feast in the house of Zion. We will sing with our hearts restored. He has done great things. We will say together, we will feast and weep no more. We will feast in the house of Zion. We will sing with our hearts restored. He has done great things. We will say together, we will feast and weep no more.
Hello to everyone. Great to see you, or at least you see me. I wish you the best. I pray for your health and strength. A couple just housekeeping items I'd like to begin with for a moment. If you are part of the church family and you need a mask or want to need an additional mask, please feel free to email either Linda Dombrowski or Carol Schwam, and they will make sure that you get a mask. These ladies are making them and they have masks available. So they wanted me to let you know that they have masks available. You can get in touch with one of them and they will help you to get a mask. I wanted to mention another item. Yesterday there was an email scam that went out, had my name on it, asking for a favor from me, and many of you, I think, got that email. Just wanted to let you know I did not send any email out. It was a total scam. I'm sorry that it happened, but I could do nothing about it. If you get an email from me that looks suspicious or is asking for a favor, please do me a favor and just delete the thing. Okay. Well, this is week 7 since we've had church together back in the middle of March. A whole lot of time to enjoy your family. What could go wrong with that, right? Pray and hope that each of you are doing well. And my message today has to do with a statement in the book of Daniel, the Old Testament book of Daniel. This is in chapter 6 and verse 28. I would like to read that verse and then discuss it. This is shortly after Daniel came out of the den of lions. The king's name there was Darius. And it closes that chapter by saying, so Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and during the reign of Cyrus the Persian. When I read that recently, it just unleashed a whole chain of thought in my mind, because that verse could easily have stuck the names of half a dozen other kings there as well. You know, Daniel lived through tremendous changes in his life, and I want to think about changes along with choices and tie together the idea that while we're going through changes, we still get to make choices. And that determines how we handle that change. This verse says that Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius, and during the reign of Cyrus, and during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, and during the reign of Belshazzar, and during the reign of Jehoiakim, the Judean king. Daniel was born around 600 BC. And of course he was born in the land of Judah when he was a teenager. Nebuchadnezzar came up from Iraq, from Babylon, destroyed Jerusalem, carried away, it says, 10,000 captives. Daniel was one of those young men. He was probably a teenager. You know the story in the first chapter of Daniel, how that Nebuchadnezzar picked some of the nobility, some of the upper class, who he wanted to train for duties in the palace and administrative positions. So Daniel was apparently from the upper class, had a good home, a good upbringing, and then what a cataclysmic change this must have been, to be hauled off as a prisoner, to be treated now as a no one in a new place. And I don't know of a more catastrophic change that any of us could have in our lives. But of course Nebuchadnezzar and those stories connected with him in the book of Daniel, they played out. And there were other kings that came through. There was Belshazzar, or his father Nabonidus, and the two of them reigned together. You know the story of the handwriting on the wall that appeared during the reign of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. Daniel was there. He was involved in that. He lived through all of that change. And then there was Cyrus, this man who swept down from Persia, which is Iran, and overthrew the Babylonians. And now Daniel has a new king, and a new administration, and a new set of rules and guidelines and expectations upon him, responsibilities. And after Cyrus, there was Darius. And this is the guy who ended up putting Daniel in the lion's den. So the verse that says, so Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius. Oh, and also during the reign of Cyrus. And I could add, oh, and also during the reign of all these other kings. Says a tremendous, tells us something tremendous about this man Daniel. He faced incredible changes and challenges that came upon him. And yet, during all of this time, somehow or other, Daniel was able to choose to face this change in a way that kept him intact, that kept him healthy and whole and strong. And it says he prospered. That's an incredible thought, an incredible statement. You know, I think what it must have been like, Daniel at times must have felt like a little pebble in the current, getting beat around and thrown around. Must have felt like a piece of little plastic in a windstorm, just blown this way and blown that way. We all feel like that at times. We all have had those moments or those changes, some of them drastic, huge changes that come, that even we look even at as a crisis in our life, because we were looking this direction and suddenly now we have to look that direction and face the change. These were seismic shifts, because these lands that Daniel lived in were invaded and overthrown, new rulers, new laws that came about, and he had to figure out how to deal with all of those. And with the new king and the new rules and the new direction, there came certainly these moments where he must have just felt dizzy. He must have felt disoriented. He must have felt confused. But somehow, Daniel prospered under all of these tremendous changes that swept through his life and his lifetime. He prospered under the circumstances of Nebuchadnezzar. You know, he was just a teenager. He prospered under the new environment of Belshazzar. Now he's in middle age. He prospered under Cyrus, it says. You know, Daniel was about 60 years old when the new king came and overthrew all that he had come to know and understand, and all that he had learned to deal with and adjust to. Now that's all in an upheaval. When King Darius threw Daniel into the lion's den, he was probably about 70 years old. He was not a teenager any longer. And yet through this long life and all of these tremendous changes, it says Daniel prospered. What does that mean? How do we do that? What is the secret to that? These are not just changes of small changes, but these are changes in direction that have to become changes in perspective. Somehow Daniel was able to do that. This spring, just a couple weeks ago, I bought some raspberry plants and set them out. They were in great shape, and I got a dozen of them, made a little raised bed and planted these things. I was so happy and proud of these raspberries. They looked great. And the next day, the wind began to blow. You know, we've had a lot of wind this spring, and for 2 days there was just a non-stop wind that blew from the west. And these poor little raspberries were, you know, taking it pretty. They were having a rough time. And then the third day, the wind shifted to the southeast, and it began to blow just as hard and steady from that direction. So now the raspberries are blown back the other direction. And when finally these 3 days of wind got done, I went and looked at them, and I was pretty dismayed to see that there was a lot of damage. They had been beat up, they had been bruised pretty strongly because they had a lot of leaves, and they sustained a good bit of damage. Not too far from them, just only a couple yards from them in my yard, is a little flag, a small American flag. And that little flag faced the same wind for all those 3 days, but that little flag has a little pivot built into it. And so when the wind's coming from the west, the flag can stream out this direction. And then when the wind comes from another direction, the flag can stream back this direction. It was able to pivot, to face, or to go in the direction that the wind was blowing it. And that little flag looks no worse for the wear after 3 days of constant wind. The raspberries are beat up. The flag prospered. It did just fine. It came through healthy and hearty because it was able to shift. It was able to pivot. It was able somehow to stretch its mind, to stretch its attitude, to adapt to a new perspective that it had before. It was able, and you know, when you think about it, the little flag had no more warning that the wind was coming than the raspberries did. It didn't know that it was about to face a gale for 3 days. And the little flag faced the very same wind and the very same strength of wind. And yet it was still able to fly. The difference is it was fastened at the center. Now the raspberries are fastened at the center too. They have roots there that are down in the ground, but they're not able to shift. The flag is planted at the center. At the same time, it's stationary, but it's still movable. That's the key. And that's what I see in Daniel's life when I ask myself, how did he handle this? What was his secret? It seems to me that change was forced upon him, and yet he still was able to make choices to manage and handle that change in a way that allowed him to prosper, to continue to be a man of righteousness and strength and integrity and influence in his time and in his generation. What does it mean when it says, so Daniel prospered? What does it mean to prosper? Well, you know, one thing, I'm not going to dwell on this, but one thing it has to mean is at the end of the Den of Lions story, when he is now up in years, he's still around. He's still there. He's alive. He kept himself alive through some very dangerous circumstances. And so Daniel was able to remain healthy. We all want to be able to do that. We seek to do that, especially in this health crisis and threat that we face. We're trying to do things to remain alive, to keep ourselves healthy. If we're able to do that, in a sense, we are prospering. But I'm not going to stick with that. I want to mention two other areas that especially stand out about this man. The issue of not being healthy, but of being helpful. This is one of the choices that Daniel made throughout his whole life. In every new crisis, in every change, Daniel made a choice to be helpful, especially to whoever it was that was his employer, which it turns out over and over again was one of these kings, because Daniel was that helpful and made himself that useful. He was beneficial, he was cooperative, he was constructive to his employer, the king. And his intelligence, but his integrity preserved him and made him so valuable to them that they made sure that he had what he needed, and they made sure that he was taken care of. You know, the very thing that got Daniel into the den of lions was the fact that he was so advantageous, so helpful to his employer, that the other employees were jealous of him. That's what started that whole story. They said, well, he's the king's favorite. We don't like that. He's going to put him over us someday, because this man is so useful. He's so incredibly helpful to the king. And they were jealous, and that's when they concocted the story about no one should be able to pray except for the king, and except to pray to the king, and the king went along with it, and then they caught Daniel praying to his God, as they knew that they would, and was able to have him thrown into the den of lions. And you know, another sign of how helpful Daniel was and how valuable he was to King Darius is that the night when he was thrown into the den of lions, this story is in chapter 6 of Daniel's book. The night he was thrown into the den of lions, the king got no sleep that night. It says he allowed no entertainment to be brought to him. He didn't even eat. He was pacing all night long. He was so worried about his friend Daniel, his helper Daniel, the one that he relied on, who was so valuable to him, because he had made himself, he made this choice to be helpful wherever he was, in whatever circumstance he was. And this was true not only of Darius, but if you go back through the other kings, you see time after time where they're coming to Daniel for help. And Daniel is making himself useful. You know the story of the handwriting on the wall with Belshazzar. When that first happened, the banquet room is full. Everybody's inebriated and having a huge party. And this finger comes and writes words on the wall. And it gets quiet. And the king's knees knocked together. And nobody knew what it meant or what to do. And the old queen mother stood up and she said to Belshazzar, O king, there is a man in your kingdom, and the Spirit is on him. And he can help you. And he will help you. And so they sent out someone to find Daniel and to bring him there. Why did the old queen mother say that? Well, she knew that Daniel always chose to put his hand to helping, to serving, to doing what he could do to lift somebody up and to help them out in their situation. That was his track record, because that was the kind of life that he chose amidst all the uncertainties and all the changes that he faced. And so the queen mother said, I know he will help you. Go find him. And of course he did. Earlier, King Nebuchadnezzar, back in an earlier era, had a dream. He didn't know what to make of this dream. He was troubled. And he couldn't figure out who to talk to or who could help him. He tried many people and they weren't able to help him. And then Daniel was called in. And Daniel said, O king, don't trouble yourself. Give me 24 hours. And let me pray and seek the face of God. And I promise you, I'll get an answer for you. That's the kind of man he was. So helpful. Always willing, eager to be engaged, to be available to help someone. Now, Daniel certainly could have chosen to have a completely different attitude than this. You know, if anybody had a reason to gripe and groan, if anybody had a reason to stomp and snort and say, "Oh, I'm not going to help you. Why would I help you? You took me as a captive when I was a teenager. You hauled me from Iraq all the way up in here to Iran, and then you threw me in a den of lions, and now you want me to help you?" He could have had an attitude of bitterness, of vindictiveness. He could have said, "I don't like this change that you've instituted. I don't want to, I just got comfortable in doing it the old way. I just figured out how to make a profit under the old system, and then you changed the whole system." Change is tough. You know, one of the words that I hear thrown about with this virus is, after it's done someday and we get back, that this was going to be America 2.0. This is now going to be the new normal of distancing ourselves or whatever, and it's going to be the new normal. And I always hate that term when I hear it. I think, well, I like the old normal. I don't want a new normal. And Daniel could have had an attitude of immaturity and childishness and vindictiveness, but he chose not to. Every time that they came to him with a new circumstance, every time he went through a change, he just pivoted and he shifted like that little flag. And he said, okay, this is a new direction. This is a new perspective that I have to put upon myself. But I can find a way to serve and love and help people in this new normal. I can do that. If they put a broom in my hand, I'll sweep. If they put a mop in my hand, I'll mop. If they call me in about a dream, I'll interpret that dream. If they need administrative tasks done, I will go to the meetings. If they tell me they want me to have a meeting, and then they tell me that I'm not allowed to meet with each other because we have to stay distance, I'll hook up Zoom and I'll figure out a new way to do it, because I will adapt to these changes. I will pivot in this direction, this new direction that the wind is blowing. And in the process, I will continue to be helpful. I will continue to serve and love and give to other people, and to find ways to bless them and enable them to succeed. That was Daniel's attitude, and it was why the scripture could say towards the end of his life, so Daniel prospered during the reign of this king and during the reign of that king, and when they had the coronavirus and before they had the virus, and when they had this and during all of these wild rides, Daniel remained helpful. He responded to the change in a way by making a choice that he was still going to be the same person, but just simply find a new way to help and to assist. I had to think about water. I was going to bring a glass of water and I got interrupted and I didn't do that. But you know, the most useful and necessary substance that all of us have, every living form on earth, including the planet itself, I suppose, is water, liquid water. But we also know that water at times becomes solid. We call it ice. And sometimes water becomes vapor. We call it steam. And we also realize that the water, in whatever form it is still the same substance. It simply has responded to the change in temperature. When it's this certain temperature, it can be liquid, and it can be very useful in that form. But then when the temperature gets lower, it becomes solid. But who among us would say that solid water is no good? On a hot summer day, you take your liquid water and you put the solid water in it, and you say, I have some water in my water, because there's many useful things and many useful properties to ice. We use ice for many kinds of things. Same way with steam. So water hasn't ceased to become useful. It hasn't got mad and gone to bed, stomped out of the room, given up. It just changes in form, and yet it remains useful in the form that it's in. This is what Daniel chose to do. Through all the different kings and all the moves and the circumstances. You know, this man Darius had hauled Daniel off again. He first was a captive early in his life when he went from Judea to Babylon to Iraq, and then later in life had to make the journey from Iraq to Iran to Persia, where the Medes and the Persians had concocted an empire, and there he served Darius. I can't imagine when he had to turn around again and be a prisoner of war or a captive a second time. I mean, he could have said, wait a minute, I went through this once and I will not go deal with this again. I mean, he could have gone down fighting, but plenty of people did. He could have maybe just went and jumped off a cliff in despair and despondency. I'm sure there were folks who did that. But Daniel said, no, the wind's blowing a different way. I can pivot and face into that wind. I can still be the same person, and yet I can still choose to be helpful and necessary and needed and bring value to those people that I can serve. And this was why he prospered. It wasn't just that he stayed alive and healthy. He also stayed helpful. Now I want to mention a second thing, and that is that Daniel chose to stay holy. Not just helpful, but holy. This is a huge part of why he prospered and what it means to prosper. He not only adapted to what he needed to do to help folks. By the way, you want to think about working to still be working and to adapt to change and become useful. It says in the first chapter of Daniel, when he first got to Babylon, that he learned the language and read the literature. Now that's a chore. He didn't have to do that. He could have said, I'm not one of you folks and I'm not going to worry with trying to learn your language. But he didn't. He said, if I'm going to bloom here where I am now planted, if I'm going to be helpful to these folks, I'm going to have to be able to communicate with them, and I'm going to have to understand their culture. So he threw himself into learning both the language and the literature of those people. That's a tremendous investment just to be able to be helpful. But the second one is that he chose to be holy during the changes, throughout the changes that he faced. In all the different governments and administrations, in all the different places where Daniel found himself. He was not only adapting and helping and blessing folks, but Daniel remained during all these changes honest and honorable. He was true to his beliefs and true to his convictions and true to his habits. You know, the first time that he got in trouble in chapter 1 was because he refused to eat certain food. And he said very kindly, but very sternly, or very authoritatively, I won't eat that stuff. Why? Excuse me. Well, he said, that would defile me. I'll do anything, I'll help anyone, but I will not defile myself. Defile is a religious term. It has to do with purity before God. So something in that food, and probably Daniel's dietary laws as a Jew, made him feel that he could not eat that food in good conscience. So he stood up because he wanted to. He stood up and said no because he wanted to remain holy. Of course, the story in chapter 6 of going into the den of lions had to do with his prayer life. The king said, you can't pray anymore unless you pray to me. And Daniel said, forget that. I'm going to pray as I always have prayed. And it says he went to his room and he opened his window toward Jerusalem as he did every day. And he got on his knees and he prayed to his God. So this was a choice he made. Changes, all sorts of kinds of changes that he faced. He adapted, he adjusted. However, he wanted to be helpful and he was helpful, but that did not he would not change his character to do that. He remained helpful, but he also remained holy as he went through these changes. When a new world was thrust upon him, he chose to be helpful in that new setting, but he also chose to be holy. To go back to the flag analogy, you know, it was like Daniel could pivot to face the wind in whatever direction it was now blowing. but the pole of his flag was still planted firmly into his relationship with God and his commitment with God. And that never changed. In other words, the wind blew the flag all different directions, but it never toppled the pole over to which the flag was attached. Daniel chose to be holy. And that's why it says he prospered. His circumstances changed, but his character did not change. And this is the choice that we all get to make as we face changes. Changes can just take our circumstances and flip them upside down. But changes cannot be forced upon our character. This is the choice that we have before us. To remain helpful and to remain holy as we go through changes. This is a secret to prosperity. This is what it means that Daniel prospered during the reigns of Cyrus and Darius and all of these other kings and other administrations and other circumstances and places where he lived during his long and fruitful life. So I want to remind you of this as I close today. Everything does not have to be perfect in order for you to be happy. Everything does not have to be glorious in order for you to be hopeful. Everything does not have to be flawless in order for it to be functional, in order for you to be functional. Everything does not have to be easy in order to be good. You don't have to make a lot of money to be prosperous. We take that term prosper and prosperous and we usually fasten it onto money. But that's not what the Bible was talking about at all when it says, so Daniel prospered during the reign, during the changes that he went through in his life. It's not talking about money. You don't have to make a lot of money in order to be prosperous. If you are healthy, you are prosperous. If you are hopeful, you are prosperous. If you keep your integrity, you are prosperous. If you have influence and people respect you, they respect your words, they respect your wisdom. If you have that, you are prosperous. If you refuse to compromise your convictions, you are prosperous. I just think of this picture of Daniel as a man kneeling on his knees, opening his window, putting orienting himself towards Jerusalem. In other words, he's recalling the faith that was instilled in him in the city of Jerusalem, in the land of Judah, as a child. And he's going back to that in his mind and in his heart as he prays. If you can open your window towards Jerusalem and get on your knees and worship your Savior, you are prosperous. If you can open your window towards Jerusalem, get on your knees and seek and find peace and power of God, you are prosperous. If the changes in government and the changes in society and the changes in circumstance and the changes in relationships that come along and the changes to all the different fabric of your life, if all of those changes do not change your faith and your confidence in God, then you, like Daniel, are prospering. I pray that you are, and I pray for you to have this kind of an attitude, to accept this as an inspiration, this man and his ability to remain helpful and yet remain holy through all the changes that life threw at him. Would you pray with me for a moment? Father in heaven, we're all in different places and we all face many different changes. All of us together as we deal with this virus and all the aftermaths of it and all the ramifications of it, we're facing a pretty sharp curve of changes. things are closed that we used to go. Places are closed where we used to go. Things are unavailable to us that we used to count on. And many of the things that we thought we would always have a certain way are now no longer going to be that way. We do our best. Help us in the process of accepting and adapting to these changes, of pivoting to face the wind as it comes from a new direction. And yet we also pray, Lord, that you will help us to keep our flagpole planted firmly in our relationship with you and our commitment with you, so that whichever direction the flag blows, it still stands as a beacon and a marker. It still remains stationary even while it is movable. This is a wonderful possibility that you offer to us. You did it for Daniel. You can do it for each and every person who sees this today. And I pray that you will do that. Strengthen us, empower us, forgive us, bless us, and let us be so helpful to other people, even as we go through these changes, that others would feel about us the way Darius felt about Daniel when he came and said, "Oh, my heart is overjoyed to know that you have not disappeared and the lions have not destroyed you, but rather you're safe and you're sound." Lord, let us have that same kind of influence with other folks. Bless and keep us until someday we can meet again. Remind us, Lord, that all of the time while we are apart, we are still together, united as your sons and daughters. In the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen. Blessings. And this song,
There's beautiful things.
He makes beautiful things.
He makes beautiful things.
Out of the dust and out of us.
All this pain, I wonder if I'll ever